Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jiajie. I'm an Associate Research Fellow in Chinese Evidence-Based Medicine Center from West China Hospital. I'm also the coordinator of Ideal China Center. For the past few years, I've been studying the methodologic challenges in surgical research, including primary and secondary studies. Today, I'm going to talk about the conflict of interest in systematic review of surgical intervention and devices. This study has been published in BMC Medical Research Methodology last year. Before I start, I would like to declare that I have no conflict of interest in relation to this presentation. Conflict of interest has been debated for many years. The empirical studies have shown that a full disclosure is an important method for reporting and managing conflict of interest and served to highlight the potential for bias. The number of systematic reviews increased rapidly in the recent year for providing a comprehensive, critical, and up-to-date method to synthesize available evidence. Meanwhile, studies regarding conflict of interest of systematic review increased for the concern about suboptimal decision made by end user for potential conflict of interest. Although a lot of published studies addressed conflict of interest in medical research, there is still a significant disproportion in the number of studies against conflict of interest, especially non-financial interest in surgical intervention and device research. Considering the importance of systematic review and the different type of conflict of interest in different fields, we conducted a comprehensive literature survey to identify a range of conflict of interest in systematic review, surgical intervention and devices. We proposed a potential checklist for conflict of interest disclosure in surgical research. We also want to explore the impact of conflict of interest disclosure on the study conclusion. We included a systematic review or a meta-analysis that only include randomized control trials, against at least one surgical intervention or device. Systematic review were identified through PubMed. We limited our search to literature published in the English language and in 2017 due to a massive number of published surgical studies. 2 reviewers independent screen abstract and full test. 2 teams of reviewers independently extract the data. Kappa value was calculated to assess the concordance of reviewers. We collected the general information for each study, including number of authors, number of trials, review types, type of journal, etc. We extracted the funding resource and classified them as industry, non-industry, no funding, and not reported. We also extract the state of conflict of interest verbatim, and then categorize them based on their character and nature. We conducted a descriptive analysis of study characteristics. We compared the funding resource and conflict of interest disclosure between Cochrane systematic review and non-Cochrane systematic review using chi-square test or Fisher exact test. The differences in authors' conclusion were compared between groups using the chi-square test. A total of 6,256 systematic reviews were identified from PubMed. 155 were finally included. Among the 155 studies, 25 were Cochrane systematic review, and more than half mentioned plasma in their studies. 23 involved researchers with affiliation with either epidemiology or statistics departments. For the result of funding information, 42 report funding from governmental agencies and academic institutions. 45 states the review were not funded. Only 3 reported the funding from pharmaceutical or devices companies. For the conflict of interest disclosure, 146 students disclosed the information of authors' conflict of interest. However, of those systematic reviews, only 35 systematic reviews declared at least one author had one conflict of interest. More than 40 terms were used to describe conflict of interest, and we categorized them into 12 terms that were the most common description of conflict of interest, including grants, fellowship, consulting, employment, patent, etc. We list this term in the table on the right of this slide. Of the 35 systematic reviews that state conflict of interest, Cochrane systematic review were more likely to provide a detailed description of the conflict of interest in comparison to those that are non-Cochrane systematic review. We found no significant differences on conclusion between systematic reviews that had a conflict of interest disclosure and those that did not. In summary, 94% of systematic review assessing surgical intervention and devices state their conflict of interest disclosure, but without detailed information. The identification and statement of conflict of interest, particularly non-financial interest, remain challenging for researchers, reviewers, and editors. More effective methods or tools for identifying, quantifying, and minimizing potential conflict of interest in systematic review are needed. Thanks for your listening.